Uh, Thank you very much to Yuan Bello for inviting me to this workshop. It's been a great learning experience, and I'm going to talk about onset detection and stroke recognition for percussion instruments in Carnatic music. I must warn you that I am kind of new to this community. Thanks to Javier Serra as part of the Comp Music project. I joined it about 3 years ago, and so please bear with me if I use wrong terminology or make some grave mistakes which are musicologically not relevant. I'm primarily a signal processing engineer and a machine learning person, and that's what we try to do on this data. Of course, I'm an avid listener of Carnatic music. I've learned it myself for very many years, not a performer though. So this is kind of the structure of the talk. I thought it's good to give a little bit of, as Javier Serra already pointed out, Carnatic music, the concert is the most important item. I'd like to give you a brief, what the structure of Carnatic music concert is all about. And then in the context of the Carnatic music concert, we are looking at percussion solo. And the task is primarily to do the onset detection and recognition. What are the challenges that we face? And the onset detection algorithm. For me, the percussion strokes are primarily a sequence of syllables, and coming from the speech background, which is my primary background, I look at speech as a sequence of syllables, and so is percussion a sequence of syllables, and we try to use for the onset detection algorithm, we try to detect the sequence of syllables or aksharas as they're called, then the data sets that we've used and the results on onset detection. And the next thing is we're looking at stroke recognition. Every percussion instrument comes with a certain set of strokes. We saw Akshay play the other day, and we want to do the transcription of the strokes that are played. And primary reasoning for this is each school has his own kind of improvisation, their own manodharma. Correct me, Ajay or Akshay around here. And so from the transcription, can we say, ultimate goal is, can we say what school does it belong to? I think we will be able to do that eventually. So to give you an idea, starting with the structure of a Carnatic music concert, this is primarily a listener's perspective, and it has been vetted by a musician at least. The music is individualistic as opposed to an ensemble. The lead performer leads the concert. It could be a vocal, a violin, a flute, veena, saxophone, mandolin, chitraveena, guitar. Whistling is also a lead performer today. And even though the lead performer is not a vocalist, the performance is based on what is called a gayaki style. Gayaki style is a vocal-based rendition, owned on the violin or the flute or whistling. They'll try to reproduce what the vocalist is trying to do. The accompaniment for the lead vocalist is generally a violin. Occasionally a veena or a flute is used, sometimes none. Percussion is the mridangam is the main percussion instrument, which is what Akshay played the other day. There are other upapakavadyas, kanjira, ghatam, morsing, and tawal, and there's also the konakol, which he did, basically the vocal-based rendition of the mridangam, sullukattu as we call it. And all the items in a concert are performed using a specific tonic. The tonic does not change across the concert. And it can change across musicians, and it can change for the same artist across concerts, because he's using a drone, and the drone could be tuned not exactly to 130 hertz, once it's 130 hertz, 131 hertz. Whatever people like the wooden drone, not necessarily the electronic drone. And a concert is generally made up of a sequence of items. The items correspond to different forms. There are different forms in Carnatic music, and these are sung or played in different ragas and different talas. Each form has a specific characteristic, which you can, when you listen to the form, for example, you can say, what is the form? And the ragas are seldom repeated, except in thematic concerts. In the entire concert, you will seldom find that the same raga is repeated. Raga is essentially a sequence is a melody, and melody is based on phraseology, which is essentially a sequence of swaras. We don't call them notes because the notes are not steady. The swara occupies actually a whole range of frequencies owing to the gamaka that is there inherent in the music. Elaboration is made of one or more items in a concert. For example, a kriti or a composition is elaborated. You have an alapna, which is completely improvisation. A composition which consists of 3 parts generally, a pallavi, an apallavi, and a charanam. And again, a composition can also lend itself to some amount of improvisation. Then there is a niraval, which is completely improvisation, swaraprastara, which is improvisation, and a solo percussion, which is also improvisation. Okay, the music is very much improvisation based. Ragam Tanam Pallavi is another hallmark of a concert, an RTP, which consists of an alapna, a tanam, a composition. An alapna is a kind of free-flowing improvisation. A tanam has a meter, although seldom accompanied by a percussion instrument. And then the composition is Pallavi, which is, many times people just compose this Pallavi on the stage and then set it to a tal and play then and there. It's a nightmare for the accompanist, but the vocalist does do that. Pallavi is rendered in different meters, or I call it speeds actually. And the Pallavi, Tanam, Swaraprastara may include multiple ragas. The rhythmic cycles that are generally chosen are pretty complex. For example, you'll have Adi Talam, Tisra Nade, I think. Akshay talked about it. So basically you have 3 aksharas per per beat, and that would be 3 into 8. So you have 24 aksharas in a cycle. People have also experimented with thalamalikas. This whole RTP can consist of different thalas. They change from the same composition, rendered in different thalas. There are other types, the Padam, the Javali, the Viruttam, the Slokam, the Varnam, and the Tillana. It's very interesting that Viruttam and Slokam, for example, there's no percussion accompaniment, but there is meter. Okay? So to give you a concert, for example, we'll start optionally with a Varnam in 2 speeds. This is written up, there is a score for this, but they tell you how to sing it up. And this is sung in double of Vidamba and quadruple of Vidamba. Then there is a Madhyama Kala Kriti, there's a medium speed Kriti, the short Swara Prastara and a Niraval. There's a mid-size Kriti with Alapna Kriti and Niraval. And I must tell you, although the number of ragas in Carnatic music or melody are as large as 800, you will find that, some which is there in concerts today, nevertheless, you will find that the mid-size Kriti will come from a set of about 40 or 50. The short Kriti will come from maybe 100, and the main item will come from 6 or 7 ragas. They call it big 6 in Carnatic music. The Ragam Tanam Pallavi and the short, fast ones can have very rare melodies. The Ragam Tanam Pallavi, in fact, it's complete. Many times they choose very, very rare melodies and improvise it in a very big way. Okay? And there's a closure. The main item in RTP are the hallmarks of the concert. So what is the work that we are doing? We are looking at the Tani Avartanam, which is the solo percussion that is there in the main item. It could be in the main item and the Ragam Tanam Pallavi. The Tani Avartanam by the solo by the percussionist. Normally they have, for a big artist, they will have at least 2 percussionists. Sometimes they have 3, sometimes 4, 5, and so on. There are some artists, I know there's a person called Kunnakudi Vaidyanathan who has 7 percussion instruments when he plays. So the objective of this work is to recognize the strokes or akshara sequences. We call them aksharas because they are the syllables here. And can we determine the characteristics of the language generated by these aksharas? Derive the relationship between aksharas and matras. What we mean is, within a particular tap, how many aksharas are there? We call that, for example, if it's a tisra nade, there are 3. For example, in the Adi Talam, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 aksharas to a particular one beat on the one tap on your lap, for that matter. That's called a matra. And then you can have more than many kalais for that matter, and how many of these make the cycle. And we can identify the school if it's possible, variation. And it's interesting that in Carnatic music, although it's considered that the accompanists, just join on stage, it's very common that you'll find that the accompanist is announced at the time of the concert, but some of the percussionists will accompany the artist very well in the composition. They repeat the syllables that are the lyrics of the composition very, very well. And that's something, if you can highlight, that would be really nice. And of course, the compositions do not start at the sum starting point. They can start at 3/4, it can start at 1.5, it can start at 1, and so on. It might be different kalais, for example, and where it starts can vary. So can we determine this? And okay, what have we done so far? This is what is our goal in terms of, this is our wishful wish list that we would like to do. Currently, where do we stand? We do stroke segmentation and classification of Tani Avartanams. We segment a waveform, which is Tani Avartanam or solo percussion into syllables. And we do recognize the syllables or strokes using a varying pattern in time and frequency. So this is what we already know, and this is borrowed from Yuan Balu's work on what is an onset and what's an attack and what's a decay. The red envelope is the envelope of this particular stroke over here. And we compare this with the syllables in spoken language, which consists of an onset, rhyme, and a coda. Rhyme is a sonorant, generally a vowel. And if you want to write it as a grammar, it's a C star, V, C star, where C stands for the consonant, V for the vowel. And so basically, it's mandatory that every syllable contains a vowel, and there is an onset, there's a vowel peak, and then there is a decay. I'm just giving you an example here. There's a syllable corresponding to in speech, for example. It starts with an onset. Then there is a peak here, and then there is a decay here. We don't know where exactly the peak is. And if you look at the energy profile, it sort of looks like the syllable that is there in a particular stroke. And why we're using this, speech is, for example, made up of a sequence of syllables. Syllables is the most fundamental production unit. You can produce, I think I speak at the rate of 175 syllables per second. I've measured it. People, maximum that you can do is about 250 syllables per second, which is the fastest mode of communication. And if you look at 200 beats per second into 3, I think we're okay. All right, so just give you what the challenges are. There's variation in tempo, loudness, and spectral characteristics, and there are a number of different instruments. I'm going to play a few of them for you. I hope this is not too loud. Maybe I should reduce it a bit. So this is the kanjira, and notice that there is a variation. This is what I'm playing over here. The onsets, for example, are not exactly equally spaced. This is the morsing, and this morsing is a device which actually keep it in the mouth and play it. I think Ajay does it to some extent, and just giving you an example of that. So this is the instrument that we have here. Let me get back to this, and tabal. This is ghatam. Ghatam is a pot, actually. And finally, the mridangam, which most of you have seen and heard. Actually, mridangam, in terms of the number of strokes, is a much easier instrument. I just want you to play one long one in kanjira here. This has been kind of a nightmare for us on onset detection. So this is and a little more about the instruments. Many of the instruments, percussion instruments, are tuned to the tonic. The mridangam is tuned to the tonic. The ghatam, I'll call it a marginal tonic. The morsing is tuned to the tonic. The kanjira is not tuned to the tonic. Tabal is not tuned to the tonic. The reason why I call ghatam a marginal tonic is if I give you just the mridangam waveform and I analyze the tonic, I can get the tonic out of it. From ghatam, because the large number of strokes are not necessarily based on the tonic, you can't find the tonic very easily. But interestingly, in all these instruments, whether they're tuned to tonic or not all strokes are dependent on the tonic. And so the work that we are doing, we look at the constituents of an onset detection algorithm. We do some pre-processing, and let's say there are 3 strokes here. The objective is to find these onsets. We remove the tonic information and then transform it to a primary detection algorithm. The objective is to get these red lines and sort of the zero crossings. We do some kind of post-processing. Okay, so what do we do for feature extraction? We extract the envelope, and people who are not in the engineering domain, I myself am an engineer, so I have to talk about this, envelope estimation and minimum phase group delay, and then we do some kind of hard thresholding. We model the signal as an amplitude and frequency modulated signal. This is just to give you an example. There's a synthetic signal here where you see the amplitude changing and also the frequency changes. And so it's quite appropriate. If you look at all these signals over here, you find that both the amplitude and the frequency are continuously changing with time. So we model this as an AM/FM signal. And we also need the frequency information, as seen in the spectrogram here. In the time domain, there's actually a weak stroke over here, and you can't see it, but you can see it in the spectral domain. Okay? So what we do is, in the AM/FM modulator, most of you who know about this, here there are 2 signals, M1 of t and M2 of t. M1 models the amplitude, M2 models the frequency. You take the derivative and the frequency comes out as the amplitude. So you can just simply track the envelope of this signal. And to track the envelope, what do? We get what is called the analytic signal and take the magnitude spectrum of the analytic signal. For those of you who are in the signal processing domain, analytic is nothing but taking the half Fourier transform and yeah.
What's the importance of the
Frequency modulation, because both time and frequency are changing. If you look at this waveform over here.
Well, what's the importance of taking that
Because we want to model the signal correctly. Just to model the signal correctly, that's it. That's all. I mean, because we don't want to make mess with the modeling of at the signal level. That's it. It's not very important from the point of view of just the envelope. Yeah? So we do this, and then we subject this envelope which is there, this red colored envelope, to what is called group delay processing. And I must say that group delay is not used in the sense of Fourier transform magnitude and phase, and derivative of the phase is the group delay. Group delay processing is like what you do, when you want to decorrelate the feature vectors, you use a discrete cosine transform. The group delay processing of any signal enhances the peaks. I'm just going to give you an example here. So if a signal has two peaks like this, the magnitude spectrum will look like this. In the group delay, for example, it will resolve the peaks very well. This is pretty well known. There's a huge body of literature on group delay-based processing. So what do? We take this envelope that we have and subject it to what is called group delay processing. Group delay processing has issues if the signal is not minimum phase, so we convert it to a minimum phase signal. And this is the original signal here, the difference signal. This is the envelope and this group delay spectrum. I'd like to draw your attention to this part here where there is a very, very weak stroke, and that weak stroke is detected. Okay? So we have done this test on a whole lot of recordings. We have 10 of them here. This is actually not an ensemble, is what my student wrote. It's actually in tandem, in the sense that all these instruments are there in tandem in this. And this is to give you an idea of how it performs. We have to thank Jan Schulter of Vienna for giving us a CNN-based technique. And of course, it performs the best, but ours performs better on mridangam, primarily because we didn't learn the thresholds for each one of the instruments. We took a common threshold across all the instruments. So the next thing is once we've got the onsets, we want to do spectrotemporal, look at the spectrotemporal characteristics of these strokes and do some recognition. I'll just get into this a little faster now. The idea is normally, for example, coming from the machine learning perspective, if you have a transcription of the waveform in terms of strokes, you pump it into whatever model and hopefully it'll align and learn. It's not a good idea. We'll show that here. What we do is we do the onset detection, get the stroke, and then do the recognition, isolated style stroke models, as we have done earlier. And these are data sets that we have taken primarily because we don't have the transcriptions for others. Omyalpuram Shivaraman is one of the leading, is the best mridangist that one can get in India. And Akshay, of course, we use this database very extensively. That is like our, first bread and butter. You test your algorithms first on that and then go on to other people's work. But the problem is the strokes across the musicians are not necessarily the same. Omyalpuram Shivaraman has about 41 strokes which are unique. And I've listed them over here. He has different combinations of strokes. And Akshay has 12 or 10 for that matter. And Thiruvarur Bhaktavatslam, another professional musician, has about 40 strokes. And what we have done is we have trained on the particular musician's data and recognized the particular musician's data, and also using the same tonic. And we use the hidden marker model-based implementation primarily because it takes up variable length patterns, for example. The variable tempo is handled very well by the HMM model. And this is the performance that we get. And this is the other example where we do not segment at the onsets, but just train flat start, give this entire phrase and ask it to learn. So the isolated style recognition seems to perform much better. I'm just going to play you this is a screenshot from Sonic Visualizer, which gives you the waveform and the transcription, and the reds correspond to the insertions, and the grays correspond to the substitutions. And I want to just make a comment after that. It's very interesting that if you look at this particular example, what we found was this insertion here is actually not an insertion. What happened was the person is calling it a single stroke. It's a composite stroke. It's playing on the right side and also playing on the left. And there's a short delay between the right and the left, and the algorithm has picked it up. So that's the problem with this. Let me skip back. How do I get back to this? Oops. Okay. There's another demonstration. I'll leave that. Then we found that after doing this, we felt that we should do what are called tonic-independent features, and I think Akshay did some work on CQT-based features along with Yuan Bello and us. And we recently have done what is called Sen filter bank Kapsel coefficients, which essentially, because as I said, the tonic is fixed in every concert, so we determine the tonic, and we build a set of filter bank energies which are normalized with respect to the tonic. Let me give you an example. These are the filter bank energies, and as this frequency here, these are frequency bins here, And this is the time here, and this is how this is the same stroke across two different tonics, and this is how it will look like. So matching them is going to become difficult. And once you do the send filter bank energies, they come to the same scale. That's exactly what we do. Just to give you an idea of what kind of normalization that we're doing with respect to the tonic. Okay, so we do this, and we've done this only on Akshay's data set, and we find that we've done the MFCCs, the chroma FCCs. Chroma is basically folding onto a single octave. Here what we find is folding onto a single octave is not very good. We have done the CQT FCCs and also the sand filter bank capsule coefficients. And CQT, we had to choose the bank very carefully. That was the fundamental difference. But otherwise, both of them are very, very similar in terms of performance. So, so this is the results that we have. And one of the things that we've started noticing is that our Onset algorithm has poor recall, but its precision is good, and at the same time, we have to go back and look at it. Is there a slight delay in the right and the left? Because the single stroke, he's playing it simultaneously on both sides. And we have to talk to the musician and find out what is right. And actually, I'm one of those who believes that machine learning and signal processing should work in tandem, So I think we should use the knowledge that what kind of an instrument is it, and say, is there going to be a stroke or not? So language model should come into picture. Scale up for other instruments. We've got Ghtam and Kanjira. And by the way, we have this data which is available, and we're willing to share it with anyone because we got permissions from all the artists. We have Ghtam and Kanjira. We have the transcriptions right now. And common framework for stroke recognition across instruments and various schools. And we want to do the pattern analysis, basically the language modeling, and start of competitions. In a solo, for example, there's something called a Mohra and a Korwai, which is kind of always there in every percussion solo. Can we identify these locations and use them in some meaningful way to identify start of composition? Separation of percussion and non-percussion is a pet idea for me from signal processing. And language models generated from the strokes too. With respect to the composition, this is again something that is very interesting to see how well a accompanist actually plays for a particular composition. And acknowledgements, of course, thanks to Javier Serra for bringing me into this work. I told him that I wish I'd known you 20 years ago. I would have done music all the time. And of course, the artist, Umyalpuram Shivaraman, is an 80-year-old gentleman. He's the best Mridangam Vidwan in India, and he comes and records for us whenever we ask him to come. And of course, a big thank you for the invitation to the rhythm workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for some questions. Anyone?
Can you comment on the advantage of this AM/FM modulation?
Yeah.
Since for me, the real advantage is that you don't have to transform to a time-frequency representation.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's not good enough since you have to incorporate the local, the phase or the group delay.
Yeah.
So if you're forced to do an STFT, you can use a time-frequency representation, which have proven to yield much better results than energy-based detections.
Yeah. First thing, I must comment that we are not doing a short time Fourier transform on the signal at all. We're taking the envelope detection, and on that, we're doing minimum phase group delay. And the reason why we do minimum phase group delay is we know that mixed phase group delay is ill-behaved. Because once things are close to the unit circle, it's going to be completely ill-behaved. So then what we do is, maybe I can just, if you don't mind, I'll just go through the details of it. I didn't give you the details of the algorithm here. So what we do is, we take this envelope here. This envelope is like a spectrum for me. Suppose I take this to be the frequency omega, and I take this to be the amplitude spectrum. Okay? Then what I can do is, I just symmetrize it. Then it becomes a zero-phase signal. Then I take the inverse Fourier transform that, and that is the minimum phase signal on which I apply group delay. And group delay has this property that around the peak, we're looking at these peaks over here, the group delay has an exponential decay around the peak. So it gives me the peak very well. That's all. We're not doing the original signal short time Fourier transform or spectrogram or nothing of the kind. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions?
So you've done a lot of work both with speech and now with music. Would you be willing to comment on which is harder and what makes one more, what distinguishes the two problems?
There are two different things. I mean, I personally believe that speech is harder. Music has more structure because, Speech, you don't have to have rhythm. You can just expand anything the way you want. So finding the syllable boundaries is a lot harder in speech. In music, if I don't find it right, the musician is going to get furious with me, and if he doesn't play it right, people are going to get furious. In speech, there's nothing like that. I can speak the way I want. So speech is a little harder in that sense, but ultimately, when you're looking at in music, what's happening is the difficulty is on the smaller changes that are there. We also work on melody identification, and in Indian music, you use the same notes in nonlinear fashion. The same set of swaras are used in two ragas. The way it's used is the same, and for me to detect that they are two different ragas is much harder than speech. Okay, because we need to do a lot. I mean, in speech, I can do a data-driven completely. In music, I have to do a knowledge-driven approach. I mean, that's my take on this. I have to use the knowledge that in Carnatic music, it's like this. In somebody who listens to Carnatic music might find that the whole person is going all off key all the time. But a particular note, can be, it has very broad band in terms of the pitches that it can occupy, whereas in one particular melody, in another melody, you're not permitted that. Typical examples are Shankaravarnam and Kalyani. There is a ga in Shankaravarnam, which is sa, re, ga, do, re, mi, for that matter. It's supposed to be absolutely flat in one melody. In the other melody, it lends itself to gamaka in a very big way. And if you sing in one in the other, people will not stand it. So these are very difficult to analyze. Yeah.
Okay. One more question for Akshay.
Do you have any insight into the recall issues that you were talking about?
Yeah, actually we found that the basic problem was that we had, recall is the relevant documents intersection, what it has got through. The primary reason being we did not do a good job on learning the threshold. See, this is completely agnostic to the signal. It doesn't know that it's music, it doesn't know it's Tamil, it does not know it's Kanjira. So we have to learn that. That's where I feel I want to put in a machine learning thing in the feedback loop so that it corrects the onsets, which we have not done so far. We have some work in speech where we have done this. So we will borrow those ideas again here to see if it will help.
Okay, and I think Ed Large still have a question.
My question is going to be about your algorithm again that you just had this slide.
Yeah.
I think you've left me in the dust with your signal processing a little bit.
Yeah.
I think, no, the next slide.
The next slide, yeah.
Yeah, so panel C is the Hilbert envelope of panel B.
Exactly.
And
correct.
then exactly how do you get to panel D?
See, panel D, what we do is we take the panel C as if it's a magnitude spectrum, because it's all positive the envelope.
What do you mean as if it's a magnitude spectrum?
We treat it as if it's the magnitude spectrum of the Fourier transform.
Of the Fourier transform?
Of the Fourier transform magnitude spectrum. Then what I do is I just symmetrize it, make a replica of this.
Okay.
Then what happens is the magnitude spectrum gives me a minimum phase signal when I take the inverse Fourier transform, the causal part of it. There's a proof for that. And then when I compute group delay on that, group delay is very well behaved. This is all to get a minimum phase group delay. Minimum phase group delay is very well behaved.
Okay.
So that's what we do. We fold this over like this, exactly like this. Then I take the inverse Fourier transform of this.
Okay.
Then it again gives me something symmetric. I mean, it will give you something like this. Then I take the causal portion.
Okay, so to put it in my 12-year-old understanding, so you're treating that time series as if it's a frequency.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma, again. So